Okay, as I mentioned to David beforehand, we're picking up the story from last time. And just to finish it up, so to say, we'll read from the Piskei, from a tshuva of the Rosh, Rabbeinu Asher, around 1300, where this business of quoting from the Rambam as though the Torah started from him, right? Correct? Then when he summarized the whole Torah, the whole halacha, gave independent formulations, and apparently in the Rosh's time, he felt that people were actually beginning to decide questions directly from his book, and the Rosh clearly objected to it. So let's start to read a bit here from the Rosh. Okay, here we go. Okay, whoops. Is your picture covering it? You guys see the whole thing, or is the beginning of the line cut off?
The top is cut off.
The top. Okay, so I'll move it down. You better?
Yes.
Let me see. Let me see. Mine is cutting on the side.
Yeah, at the bottom at the right, but otherwise it's fine.
Yeah, you're good. Okay, let me see what I have. Okay, I took you off. Otherwise, I couldn't read it the way mine was set up. Okay, so we'll read from the Tshuvas Rosh. This is the end of some discussion he had. I guess my sense is that someone asked him a question and said, the Rambam says that. So after the Rosh discusses the whole topic, I just only saw the quote. He says as follows: V'chein toim kol hamorim, all the teachers, all the ones that decide questions. V'chein toim kol hamorim horaos mitoch divrei harambam. Okay. Ve'enam b'kiyim b'gemara leida mehechen hotzi dvaro. People are really mistaken if they're going to paskin from the Rambam as a primary source and not know the Gemara from which he produced his conclusions. To'in lahatir ha'asur v'la'asar hamutar. They're actually making mistakes. It's not even that they're. He argues that they're making mistakes. That the book is taking away choices for understanding, the way the Ravid complained. He didn't write like all the other masters who always brought proofs. Namely, there was always discussion for the source.
Here.
Where's the volume? I can't hear him. I go get my hearing aids.
Okay. We set up?
Yeah, it's okay.
Okay. All previous authors would show the source in the Gemara. Because if you put your proofs out there, someone else can come along and judge the quality of the proofs. He wrote his book as though he's a prophet direct from God, below tamu, below ra'yo, without any argumentation or proof. Anybody who just simply reads it imagines that he understands it. But ain't okay. You can't genuinely understand what the Rambam is saying. If a person really doesn't know the background in Gemara, a person does not know it correctly, and he will make mistakes in the law and in deciding the law, teaching the law. Okay, so apparently it was getting pretty customary. The book was so had such a wide audience at this point, and was such an effective handbook that people were using it as the Hey Hayidiyah primary source. And to that, the Rabbeinu Asher objected vociferously. You cannot use the book as a primary source to simply go ahead and decide questions.
Okay, here.
If he does not find the proof in the Gemara.
Give me the Tanakh.
Okay? I once heard from a person who was in Barcelona Shahaya Baki Beklasa Sidri. I mean, they studied 3 sections of Gemara, namely Moed, Noshim, and Nezikin. V'amar, and this fellow said, Tamati al b'nei adam shalolam du Gemara. I'm amazed at people that don't study, that never study Gemara. V'korim b'sifrei harambam,
Where is it?
and they
It's okay. It's okay.
maybe you ought to mute until you want to ask a question. You know. V'korim b'sifrei harambam. Umorim v'donim mitoch svarav, and what they do is they teach and they decide questions right out of the books of the Rambam, as though it's a primary source, as though, as I mentioned to David, they're treating it like a statutory code. Usvurim sheyakiru bahem, and they think they really understand it, because this fellow in Barcelona, he says, he's amazed at such people. Ki amar, ani makir ba'atzmi ki begimel svarim shelamarati, in the 3 out of 4 sections of the Talmud that I studied, I understand everything that's in his book. Why? Because when reading the formulations of the Rambam, the whole context of the Gemara sort of comes out before this Talmud Chacham's eyes. Okay, but in the issues of sacrifices or the agricultural sections, simply reading it, I do not understand anything. Namely, it's a modern disparity nowadays, say that with the internet, we have information. But it doesn't mean, the fact that we have information does not mean we have understanding. That's what this fellow is really complaining about. That you'll know the Rambam's opinion, you'll know the information, but any genuine understanding, forget about that. And this fellow from Barcelona says, I know that in all the other books, everybody is no better if they don't know the Gemara that's behind them. And of course, not only the Gemara itself, but what everybody else has said. And Yom HaKosev Osher Ben Yechiel, that's the Rosh. Okay. So in terms of the critique of the Mishneh Torah, as to how it's used, okay, the critique among the Baalei Hapsak was very, very strong, okay? And we read last time letters that the Rambam made it clear, and that he made it clear in his introduction to the book, that he wanted one book that could be read by everybody. It's not clear that he imagined that the professionals will do what they've always done, or he may have had a kind of static view of the development of the law, namely that the law would not develop far beyond anything in his book. So since it doesn't develop far beyond anything in his book, he says, if I don't say anything explicitly, we read it, if I don't say anything explicit, at least you'll have the principle from which, with little reasoning, with little effort, you'll be able to do everything else. You'll be able to decide all other questions. Okay, and in that, I think history has shown that he was genuinely naive. Okay. All right. Before we do the letters of Rabbi Yonasan from Lunel, how you doing, Isaac? Yitzchak Isaac, how are you?
Yitzchak Isaac ben Peltiel Alevi is doing very good. Boker Tov, Adonai.
Boker. Okay, so let me give a little background to this exchange in Lunel. Okay, it turns out until around 1140, let's say, the early 1140s, Provence, southern France, namely from the end of Catalonia to Languedoc to Provence, you're going east along the Mediterranean coast. Culturally, they were as traditional as any other place. They didn't have Rashi and Tosfos because that was mostly northern France. It didn't come down there. 1140s is the period of Rabbeinu Tam and the Reed, the beginning of Tosfos, the 2 major players in Tosfos. But they had the Ravid, of course, who was born in around 1110. Okay. And their learning was completely traditional. It's with 1147, with the Almohads persecution in Spain, people like the Rambam left southern Spain and headed south towards North Africa and stayed in the Islamic orbit. Other people emigrated northeast. So if you're in southern Spain, going to northeast is to head towards Barcelona, Girona, of course, which, okay. And still others went further into Languedoc and Provence. For example, the Ibn Tibbins, a family of translators. They went into Provence. And the Kimchis, the father of the, we all know Radak, Reb David Kimchi, for his commentaries in Tanakh. His father, Reb Yosef Kimchi, was equally important. And indeed, when they came to Provence, Languedoc and Provence, they brought the whole Islamic culture with them. Now they read everything in Judeo-Arabic, as I described last time. That Judeo-Arabic is Arabic with Hebrew letters. Okay, it's like reading an Israeli newspaper and they say an English word and they don't give a translation, but they try to say it in Hebrew. Okay, that's a crude description, I guess. Okay, so Yehuda ibn Tibbin, the patriarch of the family, in Provence, he did a tremendous amount of translating from Arabic to Hebrew. He translated all the classical works. Emunos V'Dayos of Rabbeinu Sadia Gaon, the Kuzri from Yehuda Halevi, Tikkun Midos HaNefesh from Shlomo ibn Gviro, and Chovas HaLevavos from Bachi ibn Pekuda. We're talking about the greats here of the Jewish Islamic culture. Okay, prior to the Rambam. This is and he had translated this. This created the background already for interest, and apparently there was a receptive audience. Why the audience became receptive all of a sudden with their arrival is another issue, but there was a receptive audience for these works. Then it turns out, and the Rambam's book appeared, and we mentioned last time the Raavad had his stinging critiques of the Rambam. He had his stinging critiques of the Rambam. And then around, in either Tishrei, depends on the manuscripts you read, it's not clear apparently. In either the Tishrei of 1194 or 1195, remember the Rambam completed his book, the Mishneh Torah, in around 1187, 1188, okay? So 6-7 years later, already they had the Mishneh Torah, and Rabbi Yochanan HaKohen of Lunel, who was like 25 years younger of the Raavad of Puskir, he sent a letter asking 24 questions of the Rambam and legal difficulties in the Mishneh Torah. Turns out all these difficulties were pointed out by the Raavad, who was his senior. But the Raavad pointed out these difficulties as a stinging critique. Rabbi Yochanan HaKohen wrote these questions as a student asking for clarification from the master. Okay. And shortly, by the way, Puskier today is not known by Puskiers. If you look it up on the map, it's Vauvert, V-A-U-V-E-R-T. Arlene and I once took a trip into Provence, and I asked Professor Soloveitchik, is there anything to see in Vauvert? And he told me nothing. He spent a couple hours there and there was nothing to see. So he spent the day there. There was nothing to see. So shortly after Rabbi Yochanan HaKohen of Lunel writes his letter, other rabbis of Lunel, they write to the Rambam asking for his Moreh Nevuchim in Hebrew because they don't know Arabic. Okay. He then sends them 2 parts of the Moreh Nevuchim, the first 2 sections, in Arabic, because he did not have the ability he didn't have the patience or the time or anything to translate it now. And he said, you have Shmuel ibn Tibbin, the son of Yehuda ibn Tibbin, the son of the patriarch. He'll translate. He's the younger guy. He's the head of this translation project. He'll translate the Moreh Nevuchim. So he gives him the first 2 parts. Ibn Tibbin then wrote to the Rambam questions about translation. We have those letters. and he has to see the Rambam. And he has to see the Rambam. Meanwhile, he's not answering these questions in the Mishneh Torah. It's going on now for a while. And there must be a couple of other letters that were sent to the Rambam, and Rabbi Yonasan HaKohen really asks him, almost pleads with him to respond. So finally, in the end of the late summer, 1199, this letter we have, the Rambam responds to Yonasan HaKohen of Lunel, and this is where he really found his audience, so to say. And I'll read it in a moment. Now, following his answer to Rabbi Yonasan HaKohen, he then sent the last third of the Moreh to Ibn Tibbon. He answered him on all of his questions, and we have a famous letter that describes the kind of day he has, that if Ibn Tibbon wants to come and visit, there's not a chance that he'll be able to see him properly. Okay, why do I discuss all of this detail? Because this is the entry of not only the Mishneh Torah, but of the Moreh Nevuchim to Europe. And it starts in southern Europe in Provence. And by 1130, around 1130, by now in 1230 already, later on, okay? I should say rather first that the Moreh Nevuchim instituted a philosophic religious culture. I mean, I gave a class in the Moreh Nevuchim. All the time I study it, I can imagine that this is a book for an individual. I cannot imagine that one can create a culture out of that book, because it's a philosophical approach to Yiddishkeit, and as a philosophical approach, it's pretty much all independent effort. And nonetheless, it turns out that there was a religious philosophical culture in Provence for 100 years. It's the most amazing thing. And it produced two controversies. First controversy was against the book of the Rambam. And that blew up in 1232 when the Dominicans got a chance. Either they got a chance or someone actually went to them, and they ended up burning the books of the Rambam. When that happened, all the disputants were so shocked by this that they all backed out. And that's what Yitzchak mentioned last time, that Rabbeinu Yonah, who was arguing against the books of the Rambam, he realized that it had gone over the top. There was a famous letter from the Ramban in the middle of this controversy trying to quiet it down. But the 1232, the burning of the books of the Rambam, really shocked everybody, and they backed away. And Rabbeinu Yonah wanted to do tshuva for his so to say insult to the Rambam. Later on, in the second dispute, which was at the end of the 1200s, so let's say just crudely 1295 to 1305, people claimed that the public dispute in Paris in 1240 and the burning of the Talmud in Paris in 1242, that was an onishman hashemayim for the insult to the Rambam, for having brought about burning the books of the Rambam. Now the second, they were all everybody was chastised by the 1232 burning of the books of the Rambam. But when the thing broke out at the end of the 13th century, around 1295 to 1305, the argument was not over the books of the Rambam or putting the book in Chayram or anything like that. It was about the students who were teaching the Rambam in public, and they were not completely, they were taking it to far extremes beyond anything the Rambam could have meant. It was about the people who were studying the Rambam inappropriately and interpreting it inappropriately in public. So the parameters of the controversy had changed. And that's the famous argument where the Rashba said a person has to be of a certain age to study the Rambam, etc. Actually, I don't think I opened up a Moreh until I was 37, so I was pretty close to the to what the Rashba said. So that's the background of the tale, that this entry of the Rambam into southern Provence had consequences far beyond just these two letters. Okay, so now let's get to the letter. Okay, in the first letter, I won't do the whole letter. Rabbi Shear has a whole book devoted to the letters, okay? So the Rambam wrote it to this letter. When the Rambam finally answered Rabbi Yonasan HaKohen of Lunel in the late summer 1199, he says, Modi ani Moshe elecha harav HaKohen Yonasan. Ki be'esh higiu elai ksavcho, at the time when you all have the on the screen, right? We're good?
Yes, we good. I'm good.
Okay. When I received your questions, I was actually happy. And I said to myself, thank God, I said to my soul, you now have a redeemer. Namely, the students in Provence are the ones that now have have come to appreciate it. The Rambam. I now know that my words have reached someone who really knows what we're talking about here. And who will understand the depths of what I've written. And can argue, namely, he admitted that some of the critiques might very well be correct. That's what he wanted. Okay. And then he goes and gives the answers to the. It's a very long introductory letter, and then he treats with the actual details of the questions. But this letter that he wrote later to the whole congregation of people in Lunel, of the students, the Rabbanim of Lunel, that is really interesting. And he says as follows: Atem alufayu miyudai, chizku v'yametz levavchem. Be strong. Ani modia lachem shelo nishar bezman hazeh hakosher. Anoshim laharim degel Moshe. There is no one left in this time to raise the flag of Moshe. So Rabbi Shia pointed out this is the flag of Moshe Rabbeinu and Rabbeinu Moshe. It's a little double meaning here. Uladakdek b'divrei Ravina Ravashi. There's no one to really examine carefully the words of Ravina Ravashi. Elo atem v'chol he'arim asher svivosechem. It's only your little vicinity, your area. For some reason, this is not sitting steadily. I apologize. Sheyadati shatem kovim midrashos tamid. I know that you have a constant base medrash. V'shatem baalei. What's going on here? V'shatem baalei bina v'chachma. I know that you are men of wisdom, okay, and understanding. Aval b'chol makomos ha'ela of dot haravi bonim. In all of our places, namely everywhere in the cultural orbit of the Rambam, okay, Torah is being lost. V'rov hamedinos hagdalos mesos. The big countries, the big areas are dying. Umiyut and kosasos. The minority is on their last leg. Ukamos shlosh arbo makamos cholin. And other places, their places are sick, which might have the opportunity to recover. This description, mesos, gosos, cholin, is an idiom that is taken from a Gemara in Kedushin. I didn't realize that. I saw it in the notes of Yitzchak Shilat to this letter. Okay, there the context is completely different. It's a way of describing how horrific things are in some places, terrible in other places, and manageable in third places. Okay, and now he describes. Be'eretz Yisrael v'chol Syria, medino achas. Out of all of Eretz Yisrael and Syria, there is only one place. He Aram Tzova. He Achlab. How do you say it in Arabic? I don't know.
Halab.
We say Chalb. Oh, you don't pronounce the Aleph. Okay.
No, the Aleph Pasimonit.
Okay. And so it's Aleppo. V'yesh bo miktzas chachamim oskim b'Torah. Aval ein einam misim atzmam ba'ohel. That's, of course, a famous rabbinic idiom. In the beginning of Chukas, where it's talking about Tumah and Tahara, the Torah says, Zos HaTorah, Adam kiyamus ba'ohel. This is the law. If a person dies in the tent, and then the laws of Tumantara of Tumas Meis continue. It became a saying, and is it maybe even in Avos, maybe even. Ein haTorah miskayemes elamisha memis atzmo leil. A person is willing to die for it. Okay, in the tent of Torah. So that's a rabbinic idiom. Ubechol hagola ubechol shinor shnayim shlosha gargarim, and namely of all the surrounding area of, I guess, that part, the Middle East, there are only 2 or 3 like seeds of where real activity and learning take place. Ubechol arei Teman ve'arei Ahavayim kulam, in all of those cities, ma'atos kim b'Talmud. There's hardly anybody who studies Talmud. Avaleno makirim, even though they studied, namely they don't have any genuine mastery. Eladrush v'kabel schar. You study it and you get reward for Talmud Torah. Why? Lefisha b'ktzavosem. Those places are cut off. Now, this is in the Arabian Peninsula. He says they're basically cut off. They're culturally isolated, so therefore whatever they have and no more. Uchvar hisnadvu mehem anashim ba'alei mamon yivorachem elahenu. V'shalchu elenu shluchim, v'lonu shloshod nischos ben hachibur. And we gave, people came, they underwrote the expense of copying over the Rambam's Mishneh Torah. V'chasvu nischa b'chol gvul gvul. So they now had 3 copies to bring back to the Arabian Peninsula and Yemen. And so over there, the books, the Mishneh Torah really enlightened them, because they could hardly, their level of understanding was so minimal, and their knowledge was so minimal. And indeed, because from the Igeres Teman, in the Yemenite Jews, to them, the Rambam is really the Posek Achron, whereas we have other traditions, of course, in Psak.
They call Dardaim.
What?
They call this Yemenite Dardaim. No, they are. Dardaim.
Yeah. Aval haYehudim shebahodu, the Jews in India, and anyandim haTorah shebechsav. They don't know Torah shebechsav. They don't even know the written Torah. Ve'ein lahem min hadas. All they know is Ela shehem shovsim. They know about resting on the 7th day. V'nimolim lishmon, and circumcision. That's all they knew. Ubareha Elgim. Elgim means inarticulate, literally, but here it means the Berberi coast. Okay, so that's Morocco and some of Algeria at that time. Shehem Bedas Yishmael, that's where the persecution was. Kohen HaTorah Shebechsav Kipshuto, right? The most they know is the literal Bible, the Tanakh. Ubiarei HaMa'arav, Avodaseinu, namely in the rest of the Maghreb, that's North Africa. Kvar noda es asher nigzar aleichem. V'lo nisharo lonu Ezra ela atem achenu. You in Provence are the last hope of Torah. What does it mean? He knew nothing. He did not know. It sounds like he did not know anything about the study of Torah in northern France and Germany. We're talking about one of the periods of great creativity, the Balei HaTosfos, after Rashi opened up the whole Talmud. Okay, it's amazing. V'ishtadlu lehiyoschem ishim b'nei chayil b'men of valor, ki hadavar tului b'chem. Anochi hayom lo ochal etzos v'lavo. He was old already. He passed away 4 or 5 years later. V'habarei is barach yasi al yedchem. God will help you. So that's all I want to do in this topic of the Rambam's Mishneh Torah. What I want to do now, we're really preparing the topic for next time. Number 1, we'll give an example of his writing so you can sort of appreciate it. That's the first thing we'll do. We'll give an example of his writing. And the second thing we'll do is we'll set this up because the Ramban will respond next week. I'll read Ramban who will respond to this. Okay, So it has double purposes. It's sort of a good link between the two. This is the beginning of the Rambam in Hilchos Tefillah, all right, in davening. And now let's just watch him work. Let's just watch him present the material. I have a footnote here. I'll talk about that next time, or if I have time today, okay? But I first want to just get the feeling of reading and how he presents, okay? All right, so here we go. Halacha Aleph. Mitzvah sasei lehispalel b'chol yom. It's a mitzvah sasei to daven every day. Shenemar v'avadatem es Hashem Elohechem. Mipi hashmuah lamdu. Namely, it doesn't say prayer, right? It says service. Mipi hashmuah lamdu she'avodah zo hi tefillah. It's prayer. Shenemar ula avdo b'chol levavachem. You should serve him with your full heart. Aruch hachamim ezohi avodah shebalev zo tefillah. So that's the command to daven every day. Ve'en minyan hatfilos min haTorah. Okay. Ve'en mishnah hatfilah. Mishnah or mishneh hatfilah is the nusach. There is no Torah nusach. There's no nusach from the Torah as to how you daven. Ve'en litfilah zman kavua min haTorah. You have to do it once a day, whenever. Okay. He then says, therefore, ulefichach. Nashim va'avadim chayovim b'tfilah. An Eved here is not an Eved Ivri. An Eved Ivri is a full Jew, so he has to daven like everybody else. We're talking about Eved Kanani, who is obligated to maintain the mitzvahs the same way a woman is. Lefisha he mitzvah sasei shelo azman grama. It's a mitzvah sasei that is not dependent upon time, because you're supposed to daven every day. So it's not like so many times a year or anything like that. This is the character of the mitzvah. A person should supplicate God and pray to him, and what he does is he first gives praise to God. And then you ask for your needs with request and supplication, and with tchina is already is extreme supplication. And at the end, he then has to give thanks at the end. We'll talk about this next time. I'll just point it out. Namely, the Rambam here gives the structure of our davening. We all know that. First three brachot are what? Shevach LaKadosh Baruch Hu. The middle brachot of the week, or on Shabbos, just the middle bracha of the day. That's the topic of what we call tzrachav, what a person needs, okay? And then at the end, from Ritzei till the end is what? Shevach L'hodiyol Hashem, okay? Point is, the Rambam here includes this as the definition of the mitzvah. So we'll come back to that next time, okay? Or maybe if there's time left today. Halacha Gimel. Im hayora gil, if he feels comfortable, he's used to it. Marbeh b'tchino v'akasha, he says a lot. Vim haya aral sfasayim, we know a famous aral sfasayim, Moshe Rabbeinu. Medaber kafi yichalto b'chalei sheyirtza. A person who is not necessarily so articulate, he nonetheless speaks the way, whatever his ability is, and at any time, he repeats that. How many times a person will pray? This is all min haTorah. Kol echad kafi yichalto, according to your ability. Yesh mispalei pa'amachas piyom, v'yesh mispalelim pa'amim harbei. V'hakol yehiyu mispalelim nochach hamikdash. It's part of the mitzvah d'oraisa, I guess. That you pray towards the Beis Hamikdash, b'chol makom sheyeh, wherever you are, you pray towards the Beis Hamikdash. So when you're in Tzfas, you're praying south. And when you're in Beersheba, you're praying north. In fact, one of the ways when they find old archaeological sites, they want to know, is it a church or is it a shul? They see if it's pointing to Yerushalayim. If it's a church, it's pointing east. And if it's literally pointing to Yerushalayim, like in the south or in the extreme north, then they know it's a shul. V'chen hayah hadavar tamid mi Moshe Rabbeinu ad Ezra. Okay. Halacha Dalet. Kevan shegalu Yisrael b'mei Nebuchadnezzar harasha, nis'arvu b'paras v'yavanu she'arhu umo. So after the first exile, okay, in 586, they mixed up, they came into other cultures and other countries. And now they have children in these other countries. Well, somehow and these children, of course, their language gets corrupted. Look, when we're talking and learning now, we're talking a corrupted English, yes, because we're mixing Hebrew into it. Well, there was no pure, consistent language. A person really sounded, kind of terrible. Couldn't speak in one language completely. Shademar, this is from Nehemiah. V'neim chatzim medaber Ashdodis, v'enam makirim ledaber Yehudis, v'choshon am v'am. So when the Jews came back to Eretz Yisrael from Bavel, no one could speak a straight, pure Hebrew. When one would pray, you have to say words. It's not just thought. You must say words. So namely, when they came back to Eretz Yisrael from the Golus Bavel, the Hebrew had been so corrupted, no one could actually recite any prayer, even the one that one composes for themselves. They couldn't recite a prayer in pure Hebrew. Ezra, basically, no kach with Ezra and his court saw that. Let me get this right here. They then created 18 brachos for every day. Shalosh Rishonos Sheva Lachshem, that's our first three, as I mentioned. Shalosh Achronos Hodaya, the last three are thanks. Ve'emtzoyos, in the middle, Yesh Behem She'elas Kol Hadvorim. All human requests are in these middle brachot. Why? Shehen Kemo Avos, L'chol Cheftzei Ish Ve'ish, U'Letzorchei HaTzibur Kulan. It's amazing how he says it. Our middle brachos cover all human necessities, whether it's the main conceptualizations of them. It's not the details. All human necessities, whether it's individual or it's communal. And why did they create a text, a nusach of words to say? That everybody will then learn how to daven. These inarticulate people will be tfilah shlema ketfilas baalei halashon hatzachah. There will be no distinction, namely, between those truly educated in Hebrew and those who are really inarticulate in Hebrew alone. So it was very crucial that there was a democratizing quality to prayer. Namely, every single Jew, no matter his capacities, is equally loved by God. And so he should be able to come forward to God on an equal footing with everybody else. So that the inarticulate person can now learn how to just say perfect Hebrew.
Yitzchak, if you notice, it's a beautiful Hebrew, and even today, 900 years later, people can read it and understand it. Unbelievable.
Talk about accessible Hebrew, eh? We've been speaking about the Mishneh Torah. We've been talking about accessible Hebrew, correct? That was the whole driving force.
Absolutely. But and
the davening, whoa.
It's unbelievable.
The davening isn't accessible Hebrew. What is? And the Chachamim, this is Ezra based, that we will pray corresponding to bringing sacrifices. You understand? It's called avodah. So avodah is always sacrifice. V'chol yom sheyesh karban musaf. Any day that there's a karban musaf, like on holidays, tiknu bo tefillah shlishis keneged karban musaf. There would be an extra. So the 2 day. I skipped some phrases. Excuse me. I skipped. Shtei tefillos b'chol yom keneged shnei tamidin. You have 2 prayers every day for the 2 tamid, namely those were the olot that were brought every single day. 1 in the morning, 1 in the late afternoon. V'chol yom sheyesh karban musaf. Any day that there's a karban musaf, there was another prayer. Now, tefillah shehi keneged tamid shel boker, he hanekreis tefillas hashachar, because he's going to use the words tefillas hashachar throughout his whole discussion. So he's telling you what it's referring to. Utfilo shekeneged tamid shel ben huarboyim, he hanekreis tefillas mincha. Utfilo kesheneged hamusafim, he nekreis tefillas hamusafim. Furthermore, halacha vav, v'chein hiskinu shehei adam mispalel tefilo achas balayla. That a person daven once at night. Shaharei evarei tamid shel ben huarboyim misaklim v'holchim kol halayla. Why? Because even though there's no korban for at night, the leftover of the afternoon sacrifice is burning on the altar all night. Shenemar hihola amogdo kalalai, the beginning of Tzav. Okay. Ukinyan shenemar, and it also corresponds to the verse in David Hamelech, Erev Boker v'Tzaharayim asicho v'hemeh v'yishma koli. I will beseech God in the evening, in the morning, and in the afternoon. Okay. Namely, when the rabbis first instituted the davening, Arvis was a reshus. That's a famous Gemara in the 4th chapter of Brachas. All our kids nowadays learn that sugya. Okay. V'afal pikein, nonetheless, nahagu kol Yisrael b'chol makomos moshvasehem lispalel arvis. By the time the Rambam was writing already, in fact, Arvis was just as obligatory as Shachris and Mincha. Okay, now he summarizes. Nimtzeu kol tfilos kol b'chol yom shalosh, Arvis v'Shachris and Mincha. Ub'Shabbasos b'moadim u'roshei chodashim arba. Why? Shalosh shel kol yom u'tfilas musafin. Oh wait, no, I skipped Zion. Excuse me. We didn't finish. Yeah, my mistake. V'chein tiknu tefillah achar tfilas mincha, somuch l'shkiyas hachama b'yom hatanis bilvad. Whenever they had a fast day, it's not only the fast days of Yom Kippur, but fast days for rain in the Middle East, namely in Eretz Yisrael and in Bavel. It's a question about Bavel, okay? There are some questions about Bavel. So they would actually have another Shmona Esrei after Mincha. Kedela hosif chino bakashom ibnei hatanis. V'zohi hatfilah hanekreis tfilas ne'ilah. Klomar, Ninalu sha'arei hashamayim biyad hashemesh v'nistoro. Okay. Namely, the sha'arei shamayim are now sealed. Namely, there's no light because of the sun that is going down. Lefi she'em ispalulin osa ela samuch l'shkiyas hachamo. So on fast days they added a ne'ilah. Nimtzuhu hatfilos b'chol yom, every day we end up with 3. Arvis, Shachris, and Mincha. Ub'Shabbasos b'moadim u'roshei chodashim arba. Because why? Shalosh shel kol yom u'tfilas musafim. U'v'yom haKippurim chamesh. Why? Because you have the musaf plus the ne'ilah. Arba elu u'tfilas ne'ilah. Okay. Tfilos elu ein pochasin mehen. You never do less than these. Avon mosifin alehem. It's possible to daven more. Imratzah adam hispalel kol hayom. This is the saying of Rabbi Yochanan. Kulo harashus biyado. A person can daven all day. V'chol osan hatfilo sheyosif kamo makriv nedavos this is like analogous to bringing a voluntary offering in the Beis HaMikdash, a sacrifice. Lefichach tzarich sheyechadesh davar b'chol bracho bracha min hoemtzios me'en habrachos. When you daven this extra davening, the Rambam is of the opinion in the Gemara that you have to add in each bracha some new phrases, some new quality, okay, to the bracha, if you're going to daven extra. If he did it only in one, then he wants to say more. You have to daven in such a way that at the very least it's quite clear that this is not an obligatory prayer. All right. And if it's a voluntary prayer, you have to go beyond the Takanas Chachamim and you have to add something of your own. Otherwise, what's voluntary about it? Shalosh rishonos v'shalosh rishonos v'shalosh achronos la'olam ein mosifin behem v'lo pachasim behem. The first three and the last three you never touch. Ve'ein mishanin behen davar. Okay, that's an old argument. Even if you say piyutim, can you say piyutim in the first three and the last three? That's an old argument, and it sounds from here that the Rambam was 100% against it. The Ravid says, Kosav Ravid, Afa Pishalo Yechadesh. This business of saying something of your own in the davening, is even if you don't say anything new, you're allowed to daven always. So I think we'll stop here, okay? And what we'll do is we'll pick up next time. We'll go back. We'll just touch a little. Just a little Or Sameach. In my family, we've always been fans of the Or Sameach. So we'll make a comment on this business of the structure of the davening, that it sounds like the Rambam is saying that the structure of the davening is midiraisa. Even when a person davens in his own words and completely constructs his own davening, a person has to start with shevach, praise of God, his request, followed by thanks. And that apparently is part of the mitzvah d'oraisa, which is a striking comment. I mean, till you read this in the Rambam, you would think that what? That even if there's a mitzvah in a Torah to daven, that the structure of the davening is completely minach chachamim, and the Rambam insists that it's not that way. Okay, so we'll pick it up next time. All right. And what we'll do is the Ramban. What we're going to do, besides doing that footnote, which is just a side point, next time in the Sefer HaMitzvos, the Rambam castigates, so to say, criticizes rather, the Baal Halachos Gedolos, that he counted saying Hallel on Yom Tov as a mitzvah. And the Rambam says that was created by David HaMelech. How can you say it's a mitzvah min Torah? So it turns out the Ramban defends the Baal Halachos Gedolos, okay, number one. And number two, he then quotes this discussion that we just read of the Rambam. Okay, he quotes this discussion as a defense, as part of his argument. Okay, so it's a preparatory to the argument. It's also a beautiful introduction, is that to see how the Rambam writes. You study Gemara, you study brachas the way you do it, the way you learn it. You have to remember, when we went to yeshiva, they didn't teach us brachas. You learn brachas on your own later on, right? When we went to yeshiva, you learn Baba Kama, Baba Metzia, right? Right, David?
Sounds familiar.
Baba Kama, Baba Metzia, right? We learned Elu Metzias, Hameniach, right? Abba,
I think I could say it by heart.
Right. Brachas we never learned. But if you do learn brachas, you will never have this structural presentation of the whole mitzvah of davening as an introduction. Nowhere. It assumes you know what davening is, and it tells you everything about davening, and it doesn't come together. And here the Rambam so beautifully has sort of really put it together so gorgeously. What the structure of davening is, definition of the mitzvah, right? How many times, how they came about, etc. And now he's on his way into the details. So now you see the presentation of the dinim of davening is really a standalone text. It's complete, right? See what he did? Gave you the whole background. You study Maseches Brachos, you won't see this. You'll have to construct it in your own head from studying Maseches Brachos. If you had to write up your own notes and organize all the info, you'd write a crude version of this, or if you're really good, you might get close here. Okay. All right. Okay.
Thank you.
Well, cool.
Isaac.
All right.
And to all the other Isaacs, have a good day.
Yeah.
To all of you.
How are the Isaacs doing?
Non-Isaacs.
Okay.
When is the time for questioning here? What for questions?
Now you
What?
can ask. Now you can ask. You have a real
Okay.
question. Now the floor is open.
Okay, here's what came to my mind. I mean, the korbanot in Beit HaMikdash, right, were basically just Odaya LeHashem, right, thanking God. It was nothing there about, let's say asking for refuah shleima, asking for parnasa, and so on. So why did we, in the actual, davening, all of a sudden we have other elements in it?
Okay, so the point is that I think what the Chazal say, Tefillah Keneged Korbanot, it could be that retroactively Chazal are investing in the Korbanot. That meaning, in general, Korbanot are not only for thanks, they're also there to ensure forward. They're not, a Korban Nedava, a Korban Shlamim is there to thank God. Correct. A Todah, Korban Todah, is to thank God. Okay, a person goes through some trauma. It's described in Tehillim Kuv Zayin. You go through Abot Tzrichim Lahodos. That's thanks. Korban Shlamim is well-being in the company of God. It's different. Chatat and Hashem, that's clearly we're trying to rectify the past, correct?
Right.
So the Olah every day is not necessarily for thanks. It's just, if it's there for every day and is brought by the Tzibur, it's basically to ensure well-being. It's a way of ensuring well-being. I mean, that's how I'm imagining it, okay?
Right.
And if you look at what the Chazal do in the davening, if they say it's Keneged a Korbanos, they're taking the meaning of what they have in their davening and they're putting it, quote unquote, they're putting it back into the Korban retroactively, right? But the general attitude of a daily olah is service before God that ensures well-being. If it's every single day, all right? You have to, I think that's the key here. My battery's running low. Whenever I see that note that the battery's running low, I tell myself it's in more ways than one. What can I say? All right.
It doesn't sound that
I
way.
think that's, that's how I look at it. Okay, there's no single understanding. You realize, but that's how I look at it. That's how I look at it. The olah of every day. The Torah doesn't give a reason. As far as the Torah is concerned, it's service to God every day. Okay, the Torah uses an idiom that to the modern mind is a little off. The Torah uses an idiom as Korbani Lachmi Leishai. Lachmi, we don't think those ways. So it's a Torah's idiom, but the basic attitude, the way Chazal look at it, if you're looking at it through the perspective of what kind of davening they created, okay, then it's really to ensure well-being. All the others, it includes the whole parameter. It's praise, it's request, and it's thanks. It contains all of those. I mean, that's the simplest way to look at it, I think. Sometimes the naive way to look at it is the best.
Okay, no, don't ask any too much questions.
No,
Okay.
no, that's not it. You can ask all questions you want, but sometimes the naive answer is probably gives the best. Maybe that's how they understand the Korban Tamid every single day with this structure.
Right. Okay.
Maybe some prayer is not met in, yeah, Joseph, yeah?
Yeah. Yashkoyach, and should continue to do it every week.
Okay, thanks.
That's all.
Okay. Take care, Joseph. Be well.
Okay.
All right.
Okay, guys.
Shkoyach. Have a
Be
good
well,
day.
everybody. Be
Stay,
well. Take
stay
care.
well.
Yeah, the Dicker. Yeah. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.